Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Glenorchy Planning Authority on Monday, 20th of March 2023. I'm Beck Thomas, Mayor of Glenorchy and Chairperson of this afternoon's planning meeting. I start by acknowledging that we meet today on the land of the Palawa people and acknowledge Tasmania's Aboriginal people as the traditional owners and continuing custodians of this land on which we meet, and pay respect to elders past, present and future. I start also by acknowledging that the Glenorchy Planning Authority intends to act as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993. The Planning Authority has full power to make planning decisions on behalf of the Council. Our meeting procedures today are fairly simple. Our planning officer will present their assessment and recommendations and answer any questions of aldermen and planning authority members. I will then invite, if the applicant is present, and any other interested parties to have their say by addressing the meeting. The speakers will be limited to 5 minutes. I may then ask the planning officer to comment on any matters raised by the applicant or representatives. The planning authority will then discuss the application, and for statutory planning applications, the planning authority will decide the application and our senior statutory planner will explain appeal rights. For planning scheme amendments, our strategic planner will explain the decisions being made by the Planning Authority and the Tasmanian Planning Commission. Legal requirements of our authority today: when deciding an application, the authority is required by law to seek to further the sustainable development objectives of the Act, consider representations received during the public notification period, and make the decision by reference to current planning scheme provisions. Our meeting rules are fairly simple. Please comply with any directions given by the chairperson, and please respect other people's views and their right to have their say. It was remiss of me not to acknowledge my fellow planning authority members joining me here in chambers today: Alderman Jan Dunsby, Alderman Stephen King, Alderman Josh Cockshut and Alderman Russell Yaxley. We also have a number of our planners and strategic planners here. So welcome to everyone, and other council officers and members of the public joining us, and welcome to those members of the public joining us online. We have item 2 is apologies. We have no apologies today. We are all here. Thank you everyone for being here. Item 3 is pecuniary interest. Do any elected members or staff have any interest to declare this afternoon? None. Thank you. Item 4 is confirmation of minutes. Do I have someone to move a motion that the minutes of the Glenorchy Planning Authority meeting held on 23rd of Jan rather than 20th of Feb that's listed in our agenda, because we didn't have a meeting on the 20th of Feb. So the minutes of the Planning Authority meeting held on 23rd of January, I think that should be. Is that right? Yep. 2023 be confirmed. Do I have someone to move that as a motion? Thank you, Alderman King. Someone to second? Alderman Cockshut. Any discussion of the minutes?
Not me, you've corrected that.
Excellent. Thank you. I will put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. That's carried unanimously. Moving on then to agenda item 5, proposed use and development, multiple dwellings, one existing and one proposed, 28 Montrose Road, Montrose. And Peter is our planning officer, so over to you to present to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So as we've done before, I trust you've read the report, and we'll, just quickly move through it, and then we can get to the meat of the issue. In saying that, the proposal is for an additional dwelling at the rear of 28 Montrose Road. So I've got up here on the slide, you can see where it is, ranging of 2 metres from the rear, 2.4 from the western boundary, and about 3.3 from the eastern boundary. It's a 2-storey dwelling, somewhat higher than the existing natural ground level because of the degree of fill that would be required to get a level building area, and also to have compliant transitions for the driveway, so they would need to do quite a bit of fill. The existing dwelling's a moderate-sized dwelling, which only really needs works for the landscaping between the dwelling and the frontage, which we'll get to later. So if we move to the next slide, we get a bit of an idea of where in Montrose Road it is. and also the immediate locality, fairly well, predominantly single dwellings, but as you'll see later on, there are a number of multiple dwellings developments, which is of some relevance in working out the compliance with the performance criteria for residential density. So our reports often talk about locality. The planning scheme talks about area, and so I've tried in my report to dress it up as being locality and area being fairly well synonymous. Move to the next slide, please. So the area that I determined, which is of relevance in the residential density standard, is sort of the northern side of Tilliard Street and then both sides of Phillip Street. The reason I didn't include Cheltenham Street is once you get past the Adventist Church, I feel as though the area changes somewhat. But you'll see in my assessment with the residential density, because often this can be a contentious sort of a thing, you know, where you draw the boundaries of the area as to how you calculate your ratios. Even if we included Cheltenham Street or even the units up at, I think it's 580 or so, Main Road, it still wouldn't have a difference. So be that as it may, this is the area as I see it. Next one, please. The zoning, it's in the general residential zone. There's a tennis court on Montrose Road, zone recreation. This picture actually gives a good idea, sort of diagonally to the north, you can see the units at Phillip Street. So and then down to the right, bottom, is the units in Tilliard Street. Next one, please.
Phillip Avenue, by the way.
Phillip Avenue. So Montrose Road, we've got the existing dwelling and single-storey dwellings on either side. Next one, please. This is where the proposal is to be sited. It's presently backyard, a bit of an informal parking area to the rear. I took this photo with the permission of the owner of number 30 Montrose Road. You can see there the brick wall, which I mentioned in my report. Initially it was proposed to be demolished, but then we worked out that actually it's part of the adjoining property. So the applicant said, okay, well, we won't touch that wall. So the proposal is reliant on performance criteria for the residential density, the setbacks, site coverage and private open space, and privacy for dwellings standards, as I've listed them in the report. When we move to the residential density standard, this is the area as I saw it, and I did a bit of a survey working out how many multiple dwellings there are in that area and the density as you would measure of a site area per dwelling. And of the 19 in the area, there are 3 which would, if we were assessing it under the current scheme, wouldn't comply. They have permits, but you know they wouldn't comply with the acceptable solution. The 3 are 25 Phillip Avenue, which I've marked there with an A, 12 Tilliard Street and 10 Tilliard Street. As you see in the report, I plumbed the depths of the approvals for those, and I think it's quite apparent that they were assessed as compliant based on their built form. The statistical comparison of the numbers to say, well, these people are 1 per 308, why can't I be? When we're looking at broadly correspond and harmonious relationship with the density of the surrounding area, as this one goes outside the envelope, I don't think that they're quite comparable. So in assessing the density of the area, 3 out of 19 still are quite different. So to compare the two, because of that numerical comparison, I don't think would be quite right. For that reason, I don't believe that the proposal complies with the density standard, because it's not an exercise in finding whether there are other 1 per whatever, metres squared developments. Even if you were to say, well, there are 3 others, that's 3 out of 19, and many more dwellings which aren't even multiple dwellings. So the density doesn't specifically exclude multiple dwellings. It's the density of residential development. And there are a great number of single dwellings which would be 1 per 600. So in my opinion, it doesn't comply with that standard. Moving through the scheme, though, we've got other standards relating to setbacks. So the building envelope as shown on the plan up there shows that there's a fairly significant protrusion from the envelope as you head further to the north, and this has an impact in respect to visual bulk as viewable from the adjoining properties, specifically 30 Montrose Road and to a lesser degree of 26 Montrose Road. A lot of it is owed to the design simply wanting a large building. I appreciate there's a degree of fill required to get a level building area. Whether the applicant could have proposed a cut or otherwise, I don't know. In my mind, it's unreasonable in that it's simply imposing itself upon the site with not much regard for what it's doing outside of the site. So with respect to the setbacks and building envelope, I wasn't satisfied that the proposal complied with that standard. I appreciate the applicant did go to a bit of effort to get the building height down. He reduced the ceiling levels, and there are some other things which I'll go through later about what the applicant was able to do. In my mind still, the design as it is, just purely on setbacks, still overshadowed the adjoining private open space, and having attended the site, I'm satisfied that the bulk of that dwelling as viewable from the rear of 30 Montrose Road is quite unreasonable, and so the proposal doesn't comply. Moving on to the other standards. Oh, sorry, this is a rather good picture of the private open space of the adjoining property looking east, which would be occupied by the proposed dwelling. And so you can see a near 7 metre high building height. That fence is probably 1.5 metres high, and it's set back about 2 metres. It would be quite an imposing structure. When you're already somewhat compromised by the lot size for residential density, it starts to become something which you might consider as an overdevelopment of the site. With regards to the private open space for Unit 1, consideration of the private open space between the dwelling and the frontage is relevant if that area isn't orientated toward north, which this one is not. The applicant was rather good though in demonstrating that, subject to some landscaping and careful consideration about how you might use that area, it could comply. And if a permit were to be issued, I'd be inclined to include a condition that the private open space for the frontage must be in accordance with this revised plan that they submitted. So subject to a condition, the proposal could comply with this standard, but there are two other standards which I don't believe that it does comply with. The next one, please. This standard is a rather simple one. The driveways ought to be set 2.5 metres from a dwelling. They can be set 1 metre from a dwelling if the sill height of the window is higher than 1.7. So this one is set right on the dwelling, but it has a sill height of 1.7. So it's a discretionary consideration, but then when we look at minimised light and noise, it's masonry construction and the sill height is above 1.7. So I'm quite satisfied that the likelihood of vehicle or light or noise intrusion into the existing dwelling would be quite low. So I believe that it complies with this standard. But again, it doesn't comply with the first two that we've gone through. Before we get to the representations, the proposal was referred to Council's Development Engineer, who was satisfied that subject to conditions, the parking and stormwater and all of that sort of thing could be sufficiently managed. So if you have questions, it might be better to ask Bree. Otherwise, I'll just move on to the next part of the presentation relating to representations. It was advertised for 14 days. We received 4 representations. The representations are specifically outlined in the report and relating to visual impact amenity, lack of green space and that sort of a thing, some of which have planning merit and some of which are not really planning considerations. With respect to visual bulk, it is of a relevant consideration, and for reasons of visual bulk, I'm recommending the proposal be refused. So, in conclusion, the proposal is reliant on a number of performance criteria. I don't believe that it complies with two of those, being the residential density for multiple dwellings and setbacks and building envelope. Given that a proposal must comply, and this is pursuant to clause 561 of the planning scheme, proposal must comply with each applicable standard in the state planning provisions. I can't recommend that a permit should be granted. I would like to note that the applicant was very good. We had a number of meetings, we discussed a number of issues. It simply couldn't quite get to the point that I can recommend approval. I would hope that they'll continue to persist, because I think something could be done similar to Phillip Avenue, where if you get it to comply and be more harmonious with the surroundings and less imposing, it then fits better with the density, with the residential density in the area. That's up to them to work out, but you know, as we like to encourage, we are available to work through these things. That's all I have to present.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Any questions for Peter? Nick?
Thank you, Peter. I'm on this council nearly 15 years, and this is only the third time I think we've come across something where the staff have recommended not to go ahead. So I think I know, but for the newer members, how do we get to this point where it's got all this way and been recommended not to go ahead? Because usually it gets to this point and it's recommended to go ahead, and then we fuss and carry on and pontificate and whatnot as to whether we should or shouldn't. So we've got to this point. What was it that didn't stop you just knocking it straight back?
Well, unless we refuse it, the applicant doesn't have an appeal right, so we have to determine it.
Oh, sorry, I mean you're refusing it rather than coming to us to refuse it.
I think there were more than 4 representations.
Oh, because it's more than
Or 4.
No, yeah, sorry. Well, we don't refuse under delegation unless the applicant refuses an extension of time. The applicant gave an extension of time to have a rethink of the design, as they did, and then after they had their rethink, I said, look, I'm still going to recommend refusal.
Not quite there.
Not quite there, no. So in some instances, you may not see refusals because a person says, well, if you're going to refuse it, just do it. And then, you know, they can go through. The reason you've got 4 reps, and we typically don't do refusals under delegation.
And your discussions with the applicant, were you able to recommend any way they can get closer to this, or is that something for them in their own architect?
Strictly speaking, it's something that they need to work out because it compromises us in then assessing our own work. Yeah. But of course, I'm not going to be so obtuse as to say, you know, work out every single standard. I pointed out the standards I had concern with, and we kind of, you know, left it to them. Yeah.
Wonderful, because we are open for business. So that's
right. I mean, it's a difficult thing. That's why we're in this position as professionals to help. It'd be improper to say, oh, I'll fix this window and paint it blue, you know, that kind of thing.
I get that. We fully get that. But thank you for the effort that you've gone to, so that's great.
Thank you, Alderman King. Any further questions? Alderman Yaxley.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. Just a question just regarding where we talked about the surrounding multiple dwellings. Obviously, it's below that 325, and I understand that. Just the opinion in terms of the best interest of the community development. I guess I think in the report it outlined for B saying that if it was a developer, you could probably see some more community, better significant social and community benefit sort of thing.
Yeah.
Why is it different for a single person in that sense? How did you come to that outcome?
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. You're quite right. The scheme says that there's a pathway if there's a significant community benefit. It would be wrong of me to say that has to be government to do that. the way I view it is that if it's some sort of incorporated body which has a charter or an agreed way of organising how they manage development, that then they can be accountable to that. The degree of benefit would be much the same as any other, which is additional housing stock. There isn't a management for how the potential tenants could, maybe qualify to be able to rent it so that there's a significant benefit.
Yeah.
All housing is of benefit, but I don't believe it's significant unless it's for some kind of body which is incorporated for the purpose of providing housing, etc.
Yeah. So a question, if it was just relying upon this, do you think is something would, it's probably not, it's a hypothetical, so it's probably not really relevant. But I guess my concern is that, we're in a position where we're trying to provide more additional housing and things like that. But I do appreciate there's other issues within it all. But just that issue, I just think, I'd like to, we would need to see more housing, but I understand. But what I just wanted to clarify was the difference between a lone person and a
Yeah, look,
organisation.
in fairness, through you, Chair, to answer the question, I had a conversation with a fellow the other day who was looking at doing something as a private person that would not quite meet the density, and he had that same question, well, what could I do to be able to go through that pathway? My advice would say it would be rather difficult unless he could establish some relationship with an incorporated body that they could maybe provide, to say, well, this will be for our purposes and we'll manage it ongoing, but that person could be the developer.
Yeah.
That might be a way an individual could do it.
If I might just add to that, I think it's generally accepted that significant social and community benefit means providing for social or affordable housing through a community housing provider or the like, as Peter has said, who has a mission or purpose to be providing housing for those who most need. I guess the danger of expanding that, and I think it has occurred in other municipalities where perhaps that an alternative view has been taken and there have been some levels of commitment given to providing it under cheap rent or something, that then once that concession is provided, that's right, it's totally unregulated and there's nothing that a council or planning authority can then do to go back on that or to force that to occur. So it's really important, I guess, that these zoning provisions and density requirements apply for a reason, and there are particular areas around our municipality that do provide for greater density, but it's got to be done appropriately and acceptably with consideration to the broader area, as Peter has outlined. But it's a good question you asked, and thank you for that explanation. Any further questions, Alderman Yaxley?
No, thank you.
Any further questions from authority members? No? And we do have, I don't think we have the applicant or owner here, do we? No. So we do have a representative here. Ms. Middleton, would you like to address the authority? Yes. Yeah. Please come forward. Yeah, please come forward to the seat here. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm Sue Middleton, and I actually own a property which hasn't been mentioned, and that is 27 Phillip Avenue, which I share a back boundary with the proposed development. So I have discovered one morning that I got a letter from the council to say that there was this proposal in for approval with a 2-storey dwelling, 7 metres high, less than 3 metres from my back fence. So that shocked me quite a lot, actually. I put in a representation, and everything I've said, Peter has, you are Peter Coney, aren't you? Lovely, thank you. Has been addressed in the report, but I will just speak a bit about my main problem is the actual visual bulk of this thing and the fact that they will look directly into my backyard. I just find that such an awful concept, And I'm just a bit shocked that I had no idea anything like that was planned until I got a letter from council giving me, I think, is it 14 days to write. And by the time the letter arrived in my letterbox, I had 10 days. So it was really quite a stressful occurrence. I don't like the fact that from what I can gather, that it does project outside the building envelope. It just seems to me to be just a huge building to plop down in that backyard, and that site just doesn't seem like it would support that kind of building. I just find it very intrusive. That's basically my thing, just this huge building. There'll be windows overlooking me, there'll be more noise, there'll be light. It will just completely change the nature of where I live. I understand that there are planning laws and things to govern all these things, but it will have a big effect on me. Also, I've been in my property for over 25 years now, and I think that there will be issues with stormwater drainage, and there will probably be sewerage issues. I know that these have been addressed, and Taswater says no, everything will be fine. But I've lived. The existing dwelling is sort of on Montrose Road, which is raised quite a lot above my property. The proposed building will be, I think there's a lot of things to bring that up, to sit that up higher. And the drainage is just, the natural water runoff is quite a problem when we get significant rain events. I've had three significant sewerage overflows in the time I've lived there, because there's a sewerage easement at the back of my property. I know Taswater have done a lot of work on that, but I just am not comforted that we'll get this building put there and suddenly there's drainage issues, there's sewerage issues, and what happens then? Who do I get to fix that? So I just don't believe that the site is just reasonable to put such a big building on. And I'm probably out of time now, am I? Yes, that's okay. It was just talking off the top of my head, but it was just a shock to find that had gone such a long way through architects and planning things, and I had no idea it was even thought about. Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity to share my thoughts.
That's okay. No worries, Ms. Middleton. Sorry to hear it was a stressful time for you. The council does notify adjoining property owners within that
Yes.
within the timeframes that are stipulated in the Land Use Planning Act. So understand that can feel like a short time frame. There is nothing in the legislation, as far as I'm aware, that requires property owners to notify neighbours out of goodwill. Sometimes that occurs, but not always. Yeah, we understand that that's stressful for you, but pleased that you could be here to make your voice heard. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any further questions of planning authority members? And we have a recommendation that the application for the proposed use and development of 28 Montrose Road, Montrose, be refused for the following reasons. 1, the proposal fails to comply with either the acceptable solution or the performance criteria of clause 8.4.1, residential density for multiple dwellings. And 2, the proposal fails to comply with either the acceptable solution or the performance criteria of clause 8.4.2, setbacks and building envelope for all dwellings. I have someone to move this as a motion. I move to Alderman Dunsby, seconded Alderman King. Thank you, Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you. We've heard comprehensively from the council officer the reasons that this recommendation has got to this point in time. I commend both the council staff and the applicant for working together to try and get a compromise. And obviously that hasn't happened in this particular point in time. I do hope that they will reconsider what has happened here and reapply. We're not here to stop planning matters at all, but given the bulk and form of this particular structure, I think it's an unreasonable presentation in this residential area from my perspective, and so I will be supporting the recommendation to refuse the application.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Any further discussion? Alderman King.
Thank you, Mayor. As I said, it's very rare that in my time that I've seen council staff get to this point and say no. So I take very seriously Peter's guidance and direction on this, and it's not a simple thing. I know we do want to grow the housing stocks in this city, but it can't always happen. It doesn't fit. And so I appreciate the work that's been done, and appreciate those that have come in representing, and I appreciate your position. Also appreciate the developer wanting to build. We do want more residential in the city, but we just can't do it willy-nilly. So thank you for your input.
Thank you, Alderman King. Any further discussion? No, I echo the sentiments of my fellow authority members who have just spoken to the motion. As we have heard, we are open for business at Glenorchy City Council, and we do want to do everything we possibly can to increase housing stock through our municipality to contribute to the much needed supply issues that we are seeing with housing. So it's hard for us to say no, especially considering that developers often have invested a lot of time and money in getting to this point and time in working with our planning officers. So we really acknowledge and appreciate that, and hope that those conversations can continue to occur to get this to a point where there is some appropriate use of the land for housing on the subject property. We have plenty of zoning around our municipality that is in a residential that allows for density, greater density. This particular zone is general residential zone and doesn't lend itself to the type of density that is proposed here. And we've heard the good reasons why this particular proposal doesn't meet the performance criteria that we are bound to assess applications under as in our statutory role as a planning authority. So I too support the recommendation to refuse and really hope that conversations and work can continue to occur to get a revised application back to us at some time. Go back to move Alderman Dunsby.
Nothing further, Chair.
I'll put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. That's carried unanimously. And who would like to explain the process from here? Lyndall? Yes, thank you.
Yes, so the Planning Authority has recommended refusal for the proposal. Applicant will receive a letter from us notifying them that they have 14 days in which they can appeal that decision. If they do decide to appeal that decision, then the representatives do have an ability to become party to that decision, and that more details in that will be outlined in the letter that will go out providing notice of the GPA's decision this evening. So that should come to you shortly within the next couple of days.
Wonderful. Thank you. And you are welcome to stay for the rest of our meeting, but please don't feel you absolutely need to if you came just for that item. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 6, Planning Scheme Amendment Request, amendment to introduce GLE S8.0 Principal Activity Centre Specific Area Plan, various properties Glenorchy, and our planning officer presenting to us is Angela. So welcome, Angela.
Thank you. So we're proposing a new specific area plan for the Glenorchy CBD area, which is our principal activity centre in the municipality. And along with the SAP, we are proposing minor rezoning and nomination of some pedestrian priority streets. So in the images there, you can see at the top left is the land that is affected by the proposed SAP. Top right shows how the SAP overlay will appear in the planning maps. Bottom left is the land along Main Road. Those thin sort of blue slivers are the land that's proposed for rezoning. That's from utility zone to central business zone. That land contains some facades of buildings where the rest of the building is in the central business zone. So it's just to bring all that into the one zone. And then the bottom right is the nominated pedestrian priority street. So that's along the Main Road section within the SAP, Peltro Street and Terry Street, and then also Cooper Street that runs along between Glenorchy Central and Glenorchy Plaza. So the purpose is we're going to be providing renewed urban design standards to replace an existing specific area plan that covers the area. along with some new standards for apartment design and protection of some of the key assets that we'll go through in a minute. We're hoping to promote apartment development within the area and enliven this streetscape. So the intention is to attract more people to our centre, and then in turn that would support more economic activity, employment opportunities, and just general buzz. So that's what we're trying to get to. Next slide. So the reason that we're looking at this, so the blue area there shows the central business zone. So it's our key social and economic hub for the municipality. It's centrally located and is a key transport node. We've got a bus interchange, we've got access to the rail corridor and also the intercity cycleways just to the north. Generally, it's underdeveloped relative to what is actually allowed in the planning scheme. So there's large areas of land that's underutilised as car parking. There's limited multi-storey buildings, limited street front activation, and the precinct boundaries are not well defined. And there's also limited nighttime activity. And all of this was sort of found through the Greater Glenorchy plan work that was done in the last couple of years. So the current standards in particular don't address any potential conflict between residential use in the CBD area and other uses in the area. So, there are some new standards that are additional to what's in the current specific area plan. So the yellow area on the map there shows the solar protected area, which is the council forecourt, the St Matthew's Church heritage site, and then some adjacent shop fronts along Main Road that get very good solar access. The intention is that we protect that solar access, which is an asset of the city, while also allowing, substantial areas will be unaffected by that protection. There's a view corridor through Telosa Street, which is that arrow is pointing to the south. So the intention is to protect that view corridor through some setback and building height considerations along Telosa Street. There's Humphreys Rivulet, which is a hardened waterway, but it is an open waterway. It's part of our natural assets. So we want to ensure that there's ongoing public access alongside Humphreys Rivulet. If future development was to encroach upon that, so we want some protections around that. There's potential for the bus mall to, in the future, be relocated somewhere within the CBD area, and there's sort of ongoing consideration of that through state growth and council's traffic engineer as well. There's no particular direction or decision on that at the moment, but the SAP aims to ensure that council and state growth would have a say on any development that might encroach on the roadway or prevent that from happening down the track. And then on top of that, where there are new assets being developed, we want to introduce standards for apartments to self-protect from amenity impacts from nearby uses. So currently, apartments, residential use is allowed in the CBD area, but there is very limited standards. It's just one standard about private open space and one about storage in the zone currently, and none in the SAP. So we want to make sure that any apartment developments do deliver a quality outcome that would be amenable for residents, but not impact on the existing businesses or potential future economic development in the area. We also want them to support active transport, so we've got some requirements in there for bicycle parking or other mobility devices as well. And then the other key new thing that we are introducing is gateway sites. So they're the blue hatched areas in the image, and those are identified as being key gateways into the CBD area. So wanting to better define what our primary or principal activity centre is, let people know that they've arrived, create a sense of purpose, and support the development of iconic buildings that are going to promote the area. So on the next slide, In addition to that, we're reinforcing the existing urban design standards that are in place. To the left there, those images are taken from the Greater Glenorchy plan, and they're like an artist's impression of what's envisaged in terms of the future potential for development that, would create a more enlivened city centre. And the standards there that we're taking forward and building on are about frontage activation, so making sure that there's an active street life and interaction between people on the street and then people in the buildings at ground floor. Landmark buildings, so there's existing standards around corner buildings. We want to enhance that and make sure that corner buildings address both streets, so we're keeping everything active. Pedestrian and environment, we want to obviously promote pedestrian activity, ensure there's no or minimise conflicts between vehicles and pedestrians. And because we have such large blocks and some very large sites as well, we want to make sure that there's continuing pedestrian connections through sites as well, not just via the street. We want to ensure that any development adjacent to heritage places is and supports that heritage through discretionary consideration, whereas currently there's a specific height limit in an acceptable solution, and we're converting that into a discretionary consideration so that it's a more flexible and hopefully better outcome. And then lighting and landscaping requirements, we're bringing into consideration of those any council policy that's in place around those matters, and also taking into account safety as well as aesthetics. So where we're at the moment, this meeting here will obviously consider the proposed amendment. If the planning authority decides to prepare the amendment, then the next step would be to exhibit it for a public exhibition for 28 days, which involves advertising in the Mercury, letters to landowners and adjacent property. In addition to that, we're going beyond what's required in the legislation and also contacting key stakeholders like HIA, the Housing Industry Association, Planning Industry Australia Association. I should know what that stands for. Institute of Architects, those sorts of key stakeholders, to make sure that we do get their attention and their engagement and their feedback. We want to, cast the net as wide as we can and hopefully get the best planning controls that we can that's going to work for everybody. Once exhibition completes, then we would consider any representations that are received during that period, and we would come back to the GPA for that. And then it would be submitted to the Tasmanian Planning Commission. They would do their assessment, including holding any hearings, considering representations, and then they would make a determination. They can determine to approve with amendment, or reject the amendment. So that's the process from here. And that's pretty much it.
Great. Thank you, Angela. Very comprehensive overview. Thank you, and a very comprehensive report. Any questions for Angela? Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you. I note that the access and inclusion policy talked about the requirements for accessible housing. I think another important aspect of this that potentially hasn't been addressed, but we just need to make sure it can be addressed, is the accessible parking to that accessible housing. We've seen how a change in the direction of removing parking from the front of Northcote has excluded people with a disability from accessing that as a shopping centre. It's made it very difficult for people, and I would hate to think that in this situation that somebody with a disability might be precluded from accessing this particular housing because we haven't addressed or made sure there are provisions for appropriate parking for them for that. So is that a consideration that's built in here outside of our policy? I just don't want it to be something that gets overlooked before we get to that point, which happened before.
So the Parking and Access Code sets out the requirements for accessible parking, which if Bree's not here, so unfortunately I can't ask her to, oh, is she?
Emily's online.
Is Emily on? All right. If Emily would be willing to speak to that, that would be great.
Hi, Emily.
Hi. Yes, so as Angela said, we have the Parking and Access Code, which sets the requirements for accessible parking spaces.
So they will work together and concurrently to make sure that they're all properly addressed.
So the specific area plan won't override any of those requirements in the parking and access code. It doesn't specifically address any car parking requirements though within the SAP.
As long as we make sure that we've got it covered and we get it right this time. So thank you, appreciate that. Nothing further, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Any further questions? No? Did I have one, or is it on the next one? I have to flick back through and remind myself, just bear with me. I know I had a question, but I think it might have been on the next one. About the rezoning, that's what it was about, but I think, so this also includes some minor rezoning, that's right, isn't
That's
it?
right, yes.
Yeah.
What's minor rezoning then?
To better align the central business zone with existing buildings in the SAP area. So can you just, sorry, you probably already did cover.
No, that's okay.
Expand on that a little bit.
So as Lyndall's showing there, currently it's a bit hard, you can't really zoom in, but normally we don't, if you look at the areas surrounding the central business zone, so to the south, the zoning covers across the road and there's no separate zoning of the road itself.
Oh.
However, when the 1992 planning scheme was converted across into the 2015 interim scheme, the utility zone was applied along the full length of Main Road. I think primarily just to indicate that it is an arterial kind of road, it's an important asset. But the way that the lots align with the actual road reserve is a bit haphazard, it's historic, sometimes the buildings project within that land. And so we had a situation where there's a number of sites where currently, and part of Northgate, the frontage along Northgate is an example, where the existing buildings predominantly are within the central business zone, but then the front facade sticks out into the utility zone, which has no standards about building design or etc. So we just want to make sure that all the zone standards that currently apply to those buildings will actually apply to the front facade as well. That's really all that's about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's okay. Thanks.
Further questions? Then we have a recommendation that is quite long, so I won't read it out. We all have it in front of us on our agendas. There are 3 recommendations there about preparing the amendment to the Glenorchy local provision schedule and putting it on exhibition for a period of 28 days. And as I say, the recommendation is more fully set out in our agenda. Do I have someone to move that as a motion? Thank you, Alderman Yaxley. Someone to second? Alderman Cockshutt. Alderman Yaxley.
Thank you, Mayor. This is obviously a major part, and obviously the first steps of one of the larger pieces that will enable Glenorchy to become a really attractive city, and it kind of activates that community plan of what our community has been wanting and desires. It steps that outlines some providing opportunities for developers to attract more people, assist with residential living, ensuring the distinctive Glenorchy assets, the views of Kenyani are able to be seen for generations, and forward thinking with our transport options. I think it's a big moment and a bold moment, and a progressive moment for our city. Going through amending the planning scheme for the new SAP, I just want to thank the planners and the team for working for our community and delivering on the community plan and the objectives and the policies while ensuring the impacts are met. So I would recommend in preparation of the amendments for the recommendations enclosed.
Thank you, Alderman Yaxley. Any further discussion? Alderman Cockshutt.
Thank you. Just a comment from me, it's great to see we're going to engage the key stakeholders and go above the process, which isn't required. I think that's really important, setting the ground and bringing those relationships, and we are open for business. And I echo Alderman Yaxley's comments. It's really important that we do activate this zone for residential purposes and also as a central business district to get it activated. So I think it's going to be very exciting to see it come to life and get the CBD moving, which is great.
Thank you, Alderman Cocksher. Any further comments? I echo those comments once again from my fellow authority members. It's very pleasing to see us get to this point, following through from the Greater Glenorchy Plan, which Council endorsed, I think it was a couple of years ago, maybe even nearly 2021. This is really going those next steps with the implementation of the Greater Glenorchy Plan to activate areas of our municipality and this principal activity centre to really get the most value and benefit socially and economically for the people of Glenorchy and even Greater Hobart. So it's really pleasing to see us get to this stage. We were held back for quite some time from doing some of this strategic planning work because of the significant workload brought on by the statewide planning scheme and developing the Glenorchy local provision schedule. So it's fantastic to be at a stage now where as a planning authority and as a council more broadly we can be working towards this activation that's required to take our city into the next stage of growth and development and provide the platforms for development to occur. So really pleased to support the recommendation and undertake the consultation required to get it through to the Tasmanian Planning Commission. There's no further discussion. I'll go back to the mover, Alderman Yaxley.
No, nothing further.
I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. That's carried unanimously. And would you like to explain the process from here?
Yes, so thank you, Chair. So we'll be preparing the documentation to go out on public exhibition, and as Angela stepped you through, that's the first stage. And then if we get any representations from that exhibition, it may be that we need to look at whether there's modifications that need to occur to the controls, and that would come back to the Glenorchy Planning Authority to consider making a recommendation for any changes to that control. And then all representations, any kind of modifications that we make, and the whole control goes to the Planning Commission, who does its own assessment, holds hearings, and then makes a decision on the proposed amendment.
Thank you, Lyndall. Moving on to item 7, final item on our agenda this afternoon, planning scheme amendment request, another one. Northern Apartment Corridor, specific area plan, commercial zone between Moona and Montrose, PLAM 2210, and Darshini will be presenting to us on this one. Over to you, Darshini.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon. I'll be presenting the next planning scheme amendment. This is to introduce a new specific area plan in the Glenorchy local provision schedule. The specific area plan will be called the Northern Apartments Corridor Specific Area Plan, which will apply to the commercial zone land between Moona and Montrose along Main Road, highlighted in yellow in the image shown on the slide. The NACSAP, shortly called, will be used to facilitate the residential use as medium to high density apartments to be built above or behind ground floor shops and businesses in the zone. The NACSAP will ensure the primary commercial and economic focus of the area is retained. A key driver of this project is the Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor of the Hobart City Deal. The Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor is an 800-metre wide corridor running along Main Road and the disused rail corridor, which is planned for a public transport line. Main Road runs almost parallel to the disused rail corridor. The commercial zone land along Main Road is characterized by generally larger lot sizes suitable for commercial uses. It's easily accessible area within a transport network and placed centrally to Greater Hobart. The lots are considered underutilized currently, with buildings generally of 1 to 2 stories. There is a variety of existing uses there with large retail shops, car sales and service industries, food services, offices, medical services, etc. Residential use is currently prohibited in the commercial zone. The commercial zone land is shown in the light sort of purple along Main Road. It is largely adjoined by the inner residential zone, which is also aimed to support higher density residential uses. However, this sort of development is rarely seen in the inner residential zone, likely due to the smaller lot sizes that are characteristics of this zone. Therefore, the commercial zoned larger lots will be suitable for higher density shop top apartments of 3 to 5 stories, with the inner residential zone capable of supporting 2 to 3 story terrace or row housing, which will enable the city of Glenorchy to evolve with larger buildings along the main road core and the activity centres and graduating out to the suburbs. Some of the benefits of allowing apartments above or behind commercial activity along Main Road is the increased availability of housing in Glenorchy, diversity and housing size and type in Glenorchy, supports various strategies and plans that are being prepared for future housing in Greater Hobart, provides for opportunities to live close to services and transport network, increase the resident population to existing business activity and investment. So the NACSAP considers various different elements with specific controls to address this. Some of the elements covered in the NACSAP are the use of specific use and building design consideration to ensure the introduced residential amenity is maintained without compromising the commercial activity at street level. There are specific use controls to ensure that the commercial use is not undermined by the residential use. There are building standards which ensure there's a cohesive transition of buildings in the streetscape and lower heights of buildings existing on adjoining lands. There are specific design considerations so that apartments are built are designed and built to reduce noise impacts and impacts caused due to movement of commercial vehicles, etc. There are specific controls to ensure that apartments are designed to have adequate privacy between residences, solar access, natural ventilation, private open space, communal open space, etc. These apartment design standards will be consistent with that in the principal activity centre that SAP, that Angela just spoke about, so that there are consistent controls within the Glenorchy local provisions schedule. And furthermore, the NACSAP will promote active transportation by providing for requiring spaces for bikes and personal mobility devices. The project timeline is similar to what Angela and Lyndall have explained. If the Planning Authority decides to prepare the amendment, it will be advertised for a period of 28 days via notification on the newspaper. Letters will be sent out to landowners and adjoining neighbours and key stakeholders. Once we've finished the advertising period, any representations received will be considered and any modifications required to the planning scheme amendment will be prepared and presented at a future GPA meeting. Then the planning scheme amendment will be submitted to the Tasmanian Planning Commission, who will undertake their assessment, consider the representations and any modifications, and hold panel hearings. Finally, the Commission will then determine whether to approve the amendment or approve the amendment with modifications or reject the amendment.
Wonderful. Thank you, Darshini. Any questions? Planning Authority members? No? No, again, I was going to ask about the rezoning, but there is rezoning proposed with this one too. There's not rezoning proposed with this one, unlike the other one. Is that right?
Yes.
Yep. So where we talked about then the commercial zone currently prohibits residential use, can you just make it clear for me how the specific area plan then will enable that?
So how it works in the planning scheme is that the specific area plan will sit on top of the zone requirements. And the specific area plan only allows, this specific area plan only facilitates the residential use. So what's already permissible under the commercial zone, the use standards, the uses, and the development standards will not be overridden by the specific area plan. Where it does override it in terms of allowing the residential use and the residential apartment standards, it'll specify where it will be overriding the commercial zone standards.
Right. So that's what I wanted to be clear on, how the specific area plan can override zoning requirements, and that it does do that.
Yeah, so it'll specify in each standard whether it substitutes a standard that's in the zone standard, or if it is in addition to the zone standard. And the only places where it substitutes the zone standards is where it's allowing for residential use and where the commercial zone prohibits the residential use. But all the other applicable standards for the commercial zone will still remain as they are. So we're now not adding any further layers to the commercial uses or requirements for the commercial uses. It's purely just for the residential use that will be permissible through the specific area plan. So the use table that's in the zone will be replaced with the new use table in the specific area plan.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
If I may, just to simplify that, the SAT plan basically says you can put residential and commercial, but we're not changing the commercial zone.
That's correct.
Is that it, in simple terms?
Yeah.
And it overrides the fact we don't need to rezone, it just allows us to put it there,
Yeah.
if we get an appropriate plan.
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, that's pretty simple. That was 10 words.
I'm glad it's simple for you.
Simple for me, Mayor, you should know that.
Good.
Stranger things can happen.
Any further questions? No? Then we have a recommendation, 3 recommendations before us outlined in our agenda, again in relation to preparing the draft amendment, or prepare the amendment, sorry, to insert a new specific area plan, the NACSAP, and to place it on exhibition. Do I have someone to move this as a motion? Alderman Dunsby, someone to second. Alderman Cockshutt. Alderman Dunsby, over to you.
Thank you. I think that we could do nothing more than echo the comments we made on the previous agenda item in the benefits that we will see going forward from this decision, and that it has grown from the want of the community and the consultations we've had over the last couple of years. So I'm really pleased to see this get to this point and very happy to support the recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Any further discussion? Alderman Yaxley.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. Just wanted to say, it's great to see our cities growing up. And, obviously actively seeing this, and, for our future generations to live and play and work in our wonderful city. So it's excellent to see. And I guess, from what I understand, it includes commitments in terms of those urban densities, but also sort of sharpens our focus in terms of the commercial side as well, and enabling a range of other businesses and commercial side within that residential area. So it's exciting. I look forward to the new stages. So the stages are coming along, so I would certainly recommend the amendments.
Right, thank you, Alderman Yaxley. Any further discussion? Alderman Cockshutt.
Thank you, Mayor. Echo my fellow alderman's comments. I think it's great as well. It will unlock the CBD, and obviously housing is a big issue at the moment. So the more ways we can help with that and open up opportunities, particularly in this area, close to shopping centres and the like, for a wide variety of people, I think it's great. So we'll see what happens and go from there.
Thank you.
I think I simplified it enough.
You did. Okay, well, I have to speak to the motion in support of the motion. Again, this is great to see see us further progressing work to really expand the growth and development potential of our city. And we know that to meet the housing supply needs over coming years, we know that Greater Hobart is likely to be home to at least 60,000 more residents over the next 30 years. And to meet the supply needs for housing, we really do need to change the way we do housing, and increased density is a key part of doing that and meeting that need. This proposal aligns with the Greater Hobart Plan objectives in that it is proposing greater density and infill development, and the Greater Hobart Plan does recommend that over the next 30 years, 70% of development needs to be infill development and 30 greenfield development. So, we need to be undertaking this strategic planning to be able to provide that platform for that sort of development to occur. And we need to be saying, yes, in my backyard, and we need to be demonstrating how medium density living can be done sustainably and work well in communities where people have access to transport, access to services, access to open spaces. And we know that as a council, we're investing significantly in upgrading our open spaces to be able to provide as backyards for people in community settings. The Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor has been long talked about as a transport project, but it is not just a transport project, it is also an urban renewal project, and Council has a significant role to play in facilitating the urban renewal along the Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor through this type of strategic planning work, and saying, yes, we are open to business for developers and increasing the capital value of that land along the corridor and the potential of that to provide for sustainable development. So whilst we still wait on federal and state governments to work with us and to give us some commitment around activation of the Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor as a transport mode and project, we are getting on with work on the urban growth component, and it's really pleasing to see that. Great to clarify my question around the zoning, and to see apartments along the corridor and that mixed-use commercial residential would be really pleasing. We've seen it done in cities all around Australia. There's no reason why we can't also provide for that here in our city of Glenorchy, and I really liked Alderman Yaxley's comment that our city is growing up. And it's about time, and really pleased that we can be part of this journey, because it is a significant moment for us in Glenorchy and for the people of Glenorchy and for our city going forward to be able to provide for this type of development. So happy to support the recommendation and look forward to hearing the feedback once we pop it on exhibition, and hope we can progress it through to the Planning Commission and through the next stages as quickly as possible. I'll go back to the move up, Alderman Dunsby.
Nothing further, thank you, Chair.
I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. That's carried unanimously. Would you like to explain the process again from here? Do we need Lyndall to explain the process again from here?
Yeah, pretty good, girl.
We're good?
Ditto.
There's no statutory requirement to? Okay. Well, that being said, thank you to our planning officers and strategic planners here this afternoon. Thank you to my fellow planning authority members. Thank you to members of the public who have joined us here today, and to those of you who have joined us online. We will hopefully see you again next week for our council meeting, Monday here in council chambers and online at 3:30 p.m. I will bring the meeting to a close. Thank you.